Hi and welcome to this little bonus video. Today I'm going to show you my visit at an aircraft boneyard in Arizona. This adventure starts at the Pima Air and Space Museum in Tucson, which you see on the satellite image here, and that I will show you in more detail in another video. From there, a bus brings you to the premises of the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, where AMARG is located, the 309th Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group that operates this highly interesting facility. And on this image you can see how huge this Air Force Base is. Once you arrive at the main gate, armed Air Force personnel will perform a thorough security and ID check, and if you're a good guy, the tour continues. I was not allowed to film the area between the gate and the boneyard, which you see here, but it's more or less like a nice gated community with an adjacent military airfield.
Ridge Park will be going past with my name on the side, and that just reminds me just how old I am now when my plane's sitting in the museum. Besides being a loadmaster and a survival instructor, I was also a member of JPAC, the Joint POW MIA Accounting Command. So I would go into Laos and Vietnam and look for aircrew from the Vietnam War, downed aircrew, crash sites, and try and find remains and bring them back to the United States. So that's what I did for about 34 years. Spent a lot of time overseas training my counterparts in Allied Nations Air Forces. Be a heads up on the security protocols at Davis-Monthan. We're going to go through what we just went through here, where all your IDs are going to be checked by the security forces there. So once we get to the security checkpoint, I'll jump off, talk to the airmen there, and then lead you all into a little building where your IDs will be checked yet again, and then we'll be back on the bus. Hopefully, it usually only takes about 10 minutes, and then we'll be on our way again. So this is the Boneyard tour. Boneyard is politically incorrect. We're supposed to call it AMARG, which is the Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group. It's also known these days as America's national level air power reservoir. Somebody gets paid a lot of money to come up with these names. The big purpose of the Boneyard is not only to store the aircraft, but to regenerate aircraft, to be what's known as a key force multiplier for the military and government agencies. We can pull from the Boneyard various parts or the aircraft themselves to help beef up what we have in the inventory. But in addition to the A-10 squadrons, we've got some C-130 squadrons. Got the B-1 bomber on the left, the Bone, B-1 Bone. 4-engine supersonic swept wing aircraft. It's got a tremendous range and high speed at low levels. It was originally designed as a nuclear bomber, but then reconfigured as a conventional bomber. So it can currently carry about 84 500-pound bombs and 30 CBU or cluster bomb unit munitions. This is steadily, we are still flying a few of them, but these are being phased out. It's a beautiful airplane as far as I'm concerned. To be the largest in the world until the Russians figured out how to do it. And the Russians have 4 aircraft that are larger than this right now. But this can carry 840,000 pounds maximum takeoff weight, more than 750,000 pounds. The nose opens up, the rear end opens up. You could park 6 of these buses on board that aircraft and have room enough upstairs for 73 people. The aircraft kneels kind of like this bus does. It can kneel down to get its decks at truck bed height to make loading and unloading that much easier. And as you notice, I talked about how hard the ground is here. Well, that thing weighs 340,000 pounds, and it's just got a couple of planks underneath the gear there. Other than that, there's no pavement here whatsoever for any of these aircraft. Only 3 of these were ever built, and the Air Force decided they didn't want them. T-38 Talon on the right, very recognizable. Started flying these in the 60s as an advanced jet trainer for undergraduate pilots. And supersonic trainer. two-seater, of course. That thing's painted in the colors of Beale Air Force Base, where U-2 pilots maintain currency by flying that, and that's the U-2 colors on that. Right next to it's the T-37 trainer. This is the first jet aircraft that Air Force pilots fly in side by side, so the instructor pilot can smack the student if he's doing something wrong. So that has been replaced by the T6 Texan. We're no longer flying those. C-145A Skytruck right next to it. That's a light cargo and personnel transport aircraft. It's good for short takeoff and landings on unimproved dirt strips. Special Ops uses these. And it was actually built in Poland. This is a Polish aircraft that the United States bought. Area surveillance for people, headquarters on the ground. It detects and characterizes militarily significant targets, relays that information. On the right, the C-20 Gulfstream. This would fly alongside Air Force One when it wasn't ferrying VIPs around. It's got a hardened communications package on it. If something happened with Air Force One, it couldn't communicate, this aircraft could take over the comm for it. On the left, the NASA C-90G trainer. Anybody know what the nickname of it is? Yes, the Vomit Comet. So the entire cargo area of that aircraft is padded, and when the pilot flies a parabolic flight pattern, the people in the back would experience weightlessness for about 30 seconds. So NASA would use this to train astronauts in what it felt like to be weightless. Ron Howard got the use of one of these when he was filming Apollo 13 for some of the weightless scenes for his astronauts. Structure in front of the tail there, that's a side scanning radar, and that was used to track re-entry vehicles during ballistic missile testing. Right next to it is your garden variety P-3 Orion, and that's it's got a great range, great loiter time, used primarily as an anti-submarine and maritime patroller. Got the F-15 right next to it. Everybody recognizes this. This is America's air superiority all-weather fighter. This one had a Gulf War victory. It shut down a MiG during the Gulf War. And speaking of shoot downs, the F-15 has a pretty good record. It's shot down 104 enemy aircraft and it has sustained 0 losses, being replaced by the F-22 and the F-35. Senator John McCain was flying when he was shot down, prior to his spending 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. Right next to it, the F-14 Tomcat. Used to be called the Fred Cat until Top Gun came out in the 1980s. Navy renamed it after Tom Cruise. They liked him so much for the good publicity he gave the Navy, and that's a total lie. It's just called the Tomcat. Another Navy's version of the F-15, air superiority supersonic swept wing fighter. Right next to it's the Bombcat. This was designed to drop bombs. Big Crow on the left, you can see that arrow on the side of it. That was a target for airborne lasers. 747 with a laser on board would aim at this NKC-135E, try to hit the arrow there. Sensors on the left wingtip would pick up whether the guy struck it or not. So, on the right, the oldest aircraft here, the Canberra. This was built on a British-designed aircraft. We got the license to produce a few of them ourselves. This is a Night Intruder model. It was used for electronic countermeasures. Actually, the Vermont Air National Guard flew this one. And how old is it? 1952. So, 65 years old? 66. Nice to see something older than me for a change. That's ski equipped. You'll notice under the gear they've got skis. These are flown by the New York Air National Guard, and they use them to fly folks, conduct operations down in Antarctica. I flew one of these up to Greenland to service, supersonic. Used to be called lawn darts because they were so, they could pull so many more G's than the human body could withstand. There were a number of G-induced losses of consciousness when we first started flying these. These things would drive themselves into the ground, hence the name lawn darts. We got a lot smarter with physiological training though with our pilots, and the seat is canted back at 30 degrees, helps pilot withstand G's. We gave them a lot more training on anti-G straining maneuvers, etc. And so these things aren't falling out of the sky like they used to. Happens every once in a while. Matter of fact, we lost an Iraqi general here just last year flying one of these. These are no longer in the inventory, but well, no longer in the inventory. We are getting rid of all our F-16s. They're going to the aerial target drone program, being replaced by the F-35 and F-22. F-8 Crusader on the right. This was flown off aircraft carriers, and this one actually set the speed record coast to coast. This was the first aircraft to fly over 1,000 miles an hour coast to coast. And when it did set that record, it was Senator John Glenn who set the record. Exactly the same, except it's larger. F-101 Voodoo right next to it. Fighter interceptor from the early 50s. We used this to monitor USSR aircraft flying along our borders. Also used it in the Cuban Missile Crisis for reconnaissance purposes. Gained ace status in the Vietnam War. There were other aircrew members who were aces, but they were the backseaters, WIZOs, weapon systems officers. There were a number of those aces, but Steve Ritchie was the only pilot ace. In electronics is the nose of this EA-6 Prowler right next to it. This was used to train bombardiers and navigators on the Prowler electronics. So there was room for 6 of them on the Academe there. EA-6 Prowler was an electronic warfare aircraft flying off carriers. On the left is the C-23 Sherpa. It's probably the only aircraft you've ever seen built in Ireland. It's an Irish aircraft built by the Short brothers. And the same as the Sky Truck we saw back there, built in Poland. It's a light utility and transport aircraft, unimproved dirt landings, used by special ops. Forest Service is flying these now to drop off smoke jumpers. Right next to it's a YC-14, and this was a prototype aircraft. Only 3 of these were built. This is one. We have another one out at the museum. This was built to replace the C-130. Those are 747 engines over the wings there. The purpose of the placement of those engines is the exhaust venting over the wings would create additional lift. So this was real good at short takeoffs and landings. It did everything the Air Force wanted it to do in order to replace the C-130. Air Force ran out of money, wasn't in the budget to produce any more of them, and they just kind of forgot about the poor old YC-14. Primary gunships for the Marines, and there's 20 millimeter cannons on them still being used today. The H-1 Iroquois, known as a Huey, everybody. A lot of guys my age remember those from the Vietnam War. Medevac, troop insertion, and over 7,000 of those served in Vietnam, and still used by the Marines today. Next to it's a Sea Stallion, same thing, only different. This was a heavy lift helicopter used by the Marines for troop transport. H-2 Sea Sprite, designed in the 50s for light utility capability. This would fly between the smaller Navy aircraft like frigates and destroyers. And next to that, the Sea King. That was the first amphibious helicopter that we used. It could also drop depth charges. With a nicer paint job on it, you might recognize it as Marine One, used to ferry the president between the White House and Andrews Air Force Base at Camp David. Then we got the Seahawk over here, SH-60 Seahawk. Anti-submarine observation utility platform for the Navy. Or that's the most effective place to store them while they're here, is actually on the aircraft. Now up here on the right, you'll see a number of F-16s. It's the most numerous aircraft out here at AMARG. There are 550 of these, and every one of them is going into the aerial target drone program. From here, they'll be flown to Jacksonville, Florida, where Lockheed will outfit them with the drone hardware. Once they're turned into drones, they'll be flown over to Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, where they'll be shot at and eventually shot down over the Gulf of Mexico. And all these aircraft you see with the Arizona tail flash on them, I've worked on every single one of those. He said with a little tear in his eye. And that's where that's done. A couple of big maintenance hangars over there on the right. The real big one is where they're finalizing the regeneration of the F-16s for the target drone program. Got another Canberra, but this is a WD-57 Canberra. That Canberra is owned by NASA. They're currently flying 2 of them, and they use them for atmospheric testing. They used one to track the eclipse last year in 2017 as it went across the country. That wingspan is 2 feet longer than the Wright brothers' first flight. It's 102 feet long. Now, right next to that Canberra, you see all these T-38 Talons here. You'll notice the most numerous piece missing off these T-38s is nose gear, and that's because student pilots love to land nose heavy. So they crack a lot of those nose gears, and those are the first things to come off to replace the ones that are still flying. And these F-4s on the right, those are German F-4s with the HOs on them. Germans had a squadron at Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico. But all the F-4s are going out of service. The last one flew about 3 or 4 years ago. Those are all scheduled for demolition, every one of them. These aircraft you see with the red spray paint on them, the D's with the X on them, those being disposal. Those are all about getting ready to be auctioned off to be shredded. And it's civilian salvage agencies that will bid on those. Well, not on the F-4s. On the F-4s and the F-14s, because Iran is flying those, we make sure those are shredded on site. So it's a real good deal for the taxpayers buying those civilian aircraft. One of the issues we have out here in the Boneyard is you can see the openings on the aircraft. Those openings are invitations to a lot of the wildlife around here. So it's not unusual to find bobcats inside the openings. Of course, rattlesnakes are a big concern. There are a couple of those are removed every month by the guys working out here. Birds are a problem because their poop is real corrosive to the paint on the aircraft. And of course we do have killer bees out here. So this is all surplus equipment that can be bid on by other government agencies. Equipment to use for survival training, winter survival, and water survival training. Found a lot of good clothing, a few 20-man life rafts, which came in handy, a lot of parachute canopies. And those come in handy for survival training. Yeah, just just in the last, like Dave was saying, just in the last 3 or 4 days, a lot of aircraft have been removed from here. Aircraft here on the left are in working order, quote unquote working order. They can be returned to flying status soon. The Sky trucks up here coming up on the left, 7 of these were bought by the Forest Service, and they use them to insert firefighters, Wildcat firefighters. Only missile to ever have been fired between the states of the United States. They fired it off in Utah and shot it over to New Mexico and used it to track. What did they use it for? It simulated a 25-minute ICBM mission. So, oh, and please put your cameras down for about the next 30 seconds. It was a lot more impressive when there were 5 or 6 more of these salvage operations around here. Lots and lots of aircraft. When we shut down this road and like drag a C5 across, you can see right up on the right where it'll come through a gate here. That's probably the only place you'll see a YF-23 is on that sculpture.
Alright, so that was my visit at AMARG, and in the next bonus video I'll show you what's inside the museum. There are quite some gems in there, so thanks for watching and see you next time.